If you've ever visited the Hamptons, you've probably been swept away by the quaint cottages nestled among the trees. But if you've never seen the house architect Preston Phillips lives in, works in, and designed himself, are you in for a big surprise?
Well, I've always been interested in pure geometry and pure color. I think it goes back to being a child and playing with blocks and paints and all that sort of thing.
At first glance, architect Preston Phillips' Bridgehampton, New York home resembles a gigantic gift box wrapped in bright red and yellow paper. And if you could pull the checkerboard ribbon that divides the house, it would magically unwrap. Built in 1988 on property he first spotted from a plane, geometry collided with design when Preston found this oasis. Here he could finally build his vision, a sculptural home and studio that would surprise visitors.
It wasn't the sort of house I could plop out in the middle of a potato field with people passing by every day. So the property really lent itself very well to the idea of a composition that sort of emerged from this deep wood setting, almost a primal setting, that you would deal with that in a way that had pure geometric shapes and the primary colors.
Using these tranquil woods as a backdrop, Preston built a 2,000 square foot box and designed multicolored fiberglass panels, much like a zipper, to tie the house together. Now, living in a cube could really box you in, but Preston's love of spacious lofts, like the one he left behind in New York City, inspired him to keep his design open and airy. Reminiscent of his earlier apartment, you enter into the dining room and kitchen first.
I just moved out from New York and I had a loft, and the whole house was a big open feeling, and the kitchen was where everybody wanted to be. And of course, in New York City, even in a big loft, you had a small kitchen. So I wanted to put the kitchen right in the heart of the house. So it's just a wall that becomes a backdrop for the dining room and the entrance of the house.
The decision behind the intense color palette of red, blue, and yellow, accented with tones of black, white, and gray, stems from Preston's passion for early 20th century art.
Well, the inspiration for the color really comes from the De Stijl movement from the early 1900s in Europe. Those artists and architects all basically used pure geometry and primary colors. But in deciding which colors go on what, Frank Lloyd Wright always signed his drawings with a red square, and so that the red cube became that element.
Touches of yellow are motivated by his appreciation of Kandinsky, one of the pioneers of abstract painting.
Kandinsky taught us very clearly to use very little yellow because it's very bold and you don't use as much yellow as you use other colors. So I used yellow on the smaller volume, which is the yellow shade.
Learning from these masters taught him a few architectural tricks.
Now, black is a color that, and I consider it a color, that was used greatly in the whole process of the De Stijl. And you don't see it used too much in architecture and interior design, but it's a wonderfully valuable tool, I think, because at night that wall becomes a void. Down in the sky room, looking back through the dining room, you see the black wall, but you don't see it. That expands the space even further so that that black backdrop makes the space feel much larger again than it really is. So it's a little bit of a visual trick.
A great bargain was the inspiration for the greens used in the dining room.
I had found this great Chinese deco rug in New York in the early 70s for $75. And then I found some wonderful chairs, and I decided that we'd do those in a green velvet to match the other green in the house.
The angular atrium on the opposite side of the house was constructed to complement nature. This glass-enclosed living room is nicknamed the Sky Room, creating a greenhouse effect in more ways than one.
The Sky Room itself is really a garden room. It's in the landscape. It's an all-glass room that's totally surrounded by the gardens. So using green down there was just an obvious choice. Any other color in that room, I think, would really be jarring.
Preston's fondness for art is seen throughout the house. Here in the living room hangs one of his favorites by Andy Warhol.
To use the Warhol Marilyn above the fireplace seemed the obvious choice, you know. both for the fire that was in her life, but also the coloration of that piece.
The dramatic curved staircase leading to the second floor evokes a sense of movement in this serene setting. Keeping with the spirit of open spaces, the upstairs master bedroom and study seem to float over the first floor. From this vantage point, the vastness of the house is apparent. A vibrant red bridge links the bedroom to the study, creating the illusion of one large loft-like space, but two very private areas.
I love bedrooms. It's a place that I think you should always have a great retreat and refuge and feel totally tucked in.
The corner fireplace and a treasured quilt made by a family member bring a sense of warmth to the room. Preston's layout of open spaces and high ceilings creates a dance of light throughout the day, becoming an integral part of the design.
You're aware almost daily of how light changes. And that's one thing in architecture I think is a very valuable tool, light and how it's used. And so from morning into night, I mean, the dining terrace will be lit during the day differently from morning till afternoon. And then late afternoon, when the sun actually moves across and gets behind the trees, you get the silhouette of the leaves and the limbs on the what I call the shoji panels that are on the outside of the house, the red and yellow checkerboard. And so it looks like a Japanese screen that's, 22 feet high.
Influenced by a trip to Japan, the idyllic landscape and water garden were created.
The pond was an inspiration that after I came back from a trip to Kyoto and visited those incredible temples and the gardens, and you couldn't help but not want to create a round pond with a couple of islands in it. The gardens, I think, were the thing that really surprised me, because the more that I sort of carved away at the forest, the more enchanting the place became. And I think now it's like living in a park.
Being an artist in residence makes commuting to work really easy, and this cobalt blue pyramid that serves as Preston's office is a lot more fun to work in than a high-rise building.
I wanted the studio to be an object in the landscape, so that from the house you look and see it, but you don't see any penetrations. From the studio you don't see the house, so there is that visual distinction of not being connected. I think that from a theoretical standpoint, I'm known as a modernist. I really enjoy using modern materials and creating modern spaces for people to live in. And that certainly doesn't preclude them being comfortable and interesting and diverse.
These colorful geometric shapes still hold a sense of wonder and intrigue for the playful architect who built them.
Day in and day out, I think that the biggest challenge of any space or any design is to make it interesting. It's always different here. A cloud can come across and changes it. If you're ever here on a full moon, it's brilliantly lit on the inside. It's a very kinetic house. Things open and close and go up and down. Lighting comes and goes. I feel that the challenge of creating an interesting space every day is certainly valid. For it to change almost every hour, I think is almost, it's something you don't come in contact very often.
Without question, a modern masterpiece. So from subtle hues to bold accents, we hope we've given you some inventive ideas on how to cast a little more color into your decor. Thanks to all our guests for sharing their artistic secrets, and thank you for watching.